You're listening to the Slavic Literature Pod, your shelf help guide to all things Slavic. I'm Cameron Lalana.
And I might be known as Matt Gerasimovich.
In some provinces, anyway.
Mm-hmm.
This is part 1, chapter 17 of Vasily Grossman's Life and Fate, talking about science. Just having a great time. Ludmila, Alexandra, Nadia, they're not having a good time. They're readjusting to life in Kazan. But Victor has his work, and he doesn't care about all that bullshit like his family.
Oh, my family's in exile. Get over it.
Have you ever thought about how good it is for me to be a scientist?
Yes. Absolute STEM W. Putting
I
the
stay
W
there.
in STEM right here.
Anyway, yeah, so Victor is thinking about how much he loves science is the majority of this chapter.
Good.
Is there anywhere you want? Yeah, it is good. You might, if you read our post today, you might know that Grossman himself was not trained as a writer. He was trained as a chemical engineer, and he did do some kind of chemical testing. I don't know the exact work in the Donbass region of the Ukrainian SSR, modern day Ukraine. That's where he wrote, I believe, that for sure, his novel Glukhov. He might have written Stepan Kolchugin, his first two novels, both while we're doing that work, but I'm not 100% certain on Stepan Kolchugin's timeline. But yeah, so this is an actual background that Grossman has. Granted, not physics, but still, he was a student of science.
Yeah, we shouldn't, but he could. I like where, but towards the end, where it says, of course, physics was determining the course of the 20th century, which is kind of where we might see the great tragedy of the 20th century might be in this
Ding, ding, ding.
in allowing physics to overturn it. But I do think it's interesting, actually. And, we didn't have a ton of comments today, so I'm just going to make up stuff as I go and probably be berated 6 months by now by some random Instagram follower for something I said, as has been known to happen on occasion.
Yeah, Matt.
One occasion, but it haunts me. So physics and science, kind of like history in War and Peace, which is this force that Tolstoy is just obsessed with. Grossman kind of has this similar, it's not really an obsession, but it is something that's just very much there in the backdrop of the book, is something that is moving along. Yeah, he is kind of the driving force of history, of the war, of everything that they are living through, is this sort of the effects of knowledge, basically. And it does make me think a little bit of, this chapter actually specifically made me think of Oppenheimer just a little bit, on just kind of dealing with the effects of this, and at least how it was portrayed in the film. But the sort of, this sort of just do good, kind of, well, I won't go into my own film analysis here, but just, I'll say there's a distinction between the sort of pursuit of knowledge for its own sake and then the effects of that knowledge, which are ruthlessly exploited by governments and companies and all sorts of stuff. So these physicists that are really just pursuing their kind of, I don't know if you'd call it like pure science, but like they're just interested in physics and developing it as far as they can possibly go and seeing what it can possibly teach us about, the world that we live in. And then, of course, there is the direct application, which is building bombs, which governments quite like to do. And so it is kind of interesting, right? This pursuit of knowledge, which transcends all national, ethnic, all sorts of boundaries. Everybody has to be really working together to make this sort of happen. Yet the effects of it are so strictly divided at this point, between countries and nationalities. And it's just something that's kind of interesting.
For sure. And that, to me, when Grossman writes the paragraph, 2 years before the outbreak of war, two young Germans had split the nuclei of heavy atoms by bombarding them with neutrons. Soviet scientists, reaching similar conclusions by different paths in their own researches, suddenly experienced what the cavemen had felt thousands of years before as they lit the first bonfire. And I think, to your point, that's what Grossman's trying to draw our attention to, that throughout this chapter, it's been talked about as, to use the term that you use, kind of a pure science, as an innate human good that we pursue this. And then we have this reintroduction of the fact that it is national and it is being used by those nations, by those states, to their own ends, which is in this case war. And as unfortunately where a lot of money in science has been, and still is. If I could count the number of people who I knew graduated directly out of a STEM degree into working for government contracting or defense contractors,
You be counting for a while. I think you bring up this good point, which is that people always assume, or a lot of people assume, that just this pursuit of progress will always lead to something good or something better. And maybe you could make the argument that just knowing more, knowing better is better, but it can come with a price. In this case, it's pretty clear to see. And this is something that's going back to the 19th century Russian intellectual tradition. So this is not specifically a Grossman thing, but it is put very clearly on display here as opposed to maybe Tolstoy and medicine, which seems a little sillier at times,
right.
knowing what some medicine can do now. But hey,
I will say I think Grossman's criticisms of technology in this regard are going to hold up a little bit better, considering that I think he was. I can't say for certain he's like writing in the aftermath. Well, he is writing the aftermath of the nuclear bomb, but I can't say that was what was in his mind. But certainly, I think that will hold truer than what Tolstoy had to say
about doctors. Yeah,
yeah,
yeah.
I do think you bring up Oppenheimer. That is irrelevant. I think that the whole question the questions that film explores is basically this chapter writ large. So if you love this chapter that much and you haven't seen Oppenheimer, there you go. 2 hours of this chapter, basically.
2 hours, 3.5.
3.5. All right. Sorry, I was drunk when I watched it.
Are we in a courtroom procedural now? What is going on? Or on the opposite end, if that doesn't sound appealing to you watching that much of a film, then you can read these 2 pages.
That's true.
Kind of
that
similar.
Is a bit faster.
Mm-hmm. A little bit.
Yeah. Just a little tad bit.
A tad.
I think that's my main takeaway from this. And then of course, right, you have I also think this is leading us back into we start off on this kind of very theoretical framework where he's just thinking about how much he loves science and how no one could be more happy than a scientist. But this slow reintroduction of the real world at the end gives us, Victor right on his heels are following doubt, suffering, lack of belief, all that kind of stuff, which also is a kind of a transition into the sudden reimposition of reality away from his dreaming world in the next chapter, which is going to be a bit of a gut punch.
Yes, that is going to be a gut punch, and I will say, in terms of, well, I was just going to transition quickly to housekeeping because I didn't want to get into the discussion of tomorrow because that's its own thing. But no episode coming this Friday. We're going to delay it until the last Friday of the month for our life and faith thing because we really stupidly realized that we shouldn't release an episode that discusses chapters 1 through 31 and release it on the 19th of the month with everyone that's reading along with us. So we're going to try to stagger it a little bit more.
Right.
And my brain was on closing. And so when you said that, I immediately skipped. And that's why this is really kind of a non sequitur.
But an important one and one that we will see a note of.
Sequitur away. Yeah.
Sequitur. And I think that's all we had to cover today. So you'll hear from us again tomorrow. So bring your whatever you do to deal with sadness. A warm drink, cold drink, sweet, alcoholic, whatever your taste is. Al su sabor.
All right. Goodbye, Kevin.